Greetings, all praise the King. Welcome to Eyewitness and I with an I. Continuing on our follow-up to the Afghan war. We're here to correct some of the lies purported by the communication channels. Remember, the communication channels are biased. They work for the world class, sometimes referred to Western cultures. They don't like the Taliban. So you cannot expect to hear a kind of rounded discussion about what's happening. But you can hear some of the messages that are coming across to get people to think a certain way about this situation. You know, as a recap, they say it's the longest war in U.S. history. You know, that itself is a type of cloak, gray cloak, to point towards the U.S. when the USA, as we discussed in the other video, is working for cash at the best of whoever pays them. It's fair to say that me and you couldn't go in there to the Central Command in Tampa, Florida, and ask them to go bomb, you know, the Israelites, for example. But there's somebody out there that can. And typically, these people are European. They have, you know, profited from the work of others throughout the time of the African slave trade, and they've continued to keep their wealth so that they have gold vaults. This is one indicator that, you know, people in other places have not got their fair share, because the gold is in the vaults in these European countries. You can see what kind of castles they live in, and so on and so forth. So typically when we hear about these wars about against the U.S. or the U.S. is going to war, the U.S. They project this one as the U.S. spearheaded this war. This is not true. The U.S. is a face, and it amounts to a kind of a vehicle for the, you know, Europeans to move the populations. Now, you have to know kind of how the economics works. These Europeans control corporations that are headquartered within the United States. They extract the profits, the benefits of the corporations. People here or elsewhere get the brunt of the operation. We left with the toxins, the pollution, and whatever. You know, their intention was to invade a land that was unconquered. And when we say that this has to do with their law, that they choose to implement their law. We've talked about this, democracy, which is a vague term. It can be interpreted so many ways. Sounds good, you know, the majority rules. I mean, who could disagree with that? But then when you look at how it's done, we know that the majority really is voiceless in this state. So the idea, I think, numero uno, was to implement their system, which they call civil law. Again, you know, it's a title to be perceived as something that's good. And of course, we know the Taliban, having a religious form of law, was certainly a threat because it could become a sanctuary away from this thing they call democracy. You know, and by the way, the superpowers play against each other because they continue to build up the military capabilities to protect the world classes. But the superpowers are not against each other because they own companies that have interests within each other and profit from each other's operations and industries. For example, Russia, China, they're all in it. You know, they profit. But what we do have is we have these world classes at the top that are threatened by those at the bottom for obvious reasons, and it's not anything new we've discussed. So I guess the lesson that we should know first and foremost is that we're dealing with people who are projecting lies through their communication channels by ways of images, by ways of text. Image is huge nowadays because people's attention span is so small with the introduction of these devices and the psychological control that they've implemented using these devices. So people don't really take time to actually read anymore, to actually think about issues. People's lives are so complicated, they've been dumped down through this Western system of education, so they don't process the information. Instead, they just choose to accept whatever comes their way. It's very beneficial for the world classes who can then spew unlimited garbage and know that the most of the populations will give in. So the images are important. People see it. There you go. There's the perception. And some of these images that have been put out about the Taliban are fake. There's a lot of these staged oppositions, you know, where you know they choose to portray someone or a group in a certain way, so they show an image of them in a certain way. Now, this is something that's not easily detected by most people. But for example, they put some makeup around some of the people's eyes to make them look dark or evil. You know, generally they got these guys basically posing. You know, the Taliban is really, they function differently than the West. The West is like always trying to show off. They're very proud. And the Taliban, from what we can see, is humble. They don't go around, you know, look at me, look at me. So one way you can kind of tell what's real and fake, and this isn't 100%, you know what I'm saying? Because once we start to realize these things, then they switch it up. But one way you can tell is by the pixels, by the definition of the picture. So if it's a low definition picture, it's probably more realistic than these high definition pictures you're seeing in places like the Washington Post. You know, you think about who owns the Washington Post. Well, they say it's the richest person in the world, whatever. But regardless, this guy certainly wants to be a part of an operation to go and strip this land of its culture and its resources. Now, we should know that up front, that the idea of the war was really not to go spend $3 trillion to, you know, bring people freedom, to give people this wonderful system of law. We can assume that there was perhaps other motives at play. So, what kind of motives are we talking about? Well, as we talked about, the resources. These are human capital as well as natural. Afghanistan, we know, is plentiful in natural resources. Rare earth minerals, we can assume there's fossils there. If the Europeans had got a hold of the land, they will use it then to destroy what is really left of the planet, you know, and the animals. So it is just amazing that we have been able to push back these invaders from doing what they are setting out to accomplish to do. Now you got to know, when the stuff hits the fan, these people going in hiding. And so really it's a lot of, like they do out here with the police, they attempt to provoke you so that they have a reason to put a bullet in you. They're provoking the planet, Jah, so that they can destroy the life on the planet, because the life is too much of a threat to these people. Now, these people don't really go out and appreciate nature and look at the butterflies and squirrels. They like to sit inside in their caverns and get drunk. You know, they don't have the same aspirations as natural people. They haven't been raised in nature. They've been raised in another setting. So that has to do with the conditioning. Even the world classes have been conditioned by their own disease. So, taking into consideration the motives that are at play, we can see why it is that they were so determined to destroy the culture of Afghanistan. Now, the lies that we're hearing now, you know, it doesn't stop. You know, they've got these spokespeople. You know, they say that they represent the Taliban, and we're not sure. We're really not sure at this point. We can assume that some of these folks may be treasonous. They could be working for the enemy and attempting to get the Taliban to kind of think about their future differently. Let's say, for example, you know, one of the lies we're hearing is that they want dependency. You know, they want money from the World Bank. Now, the World Bank was instrumental in causing this havoc and chaos. It is the driving force behind this war. And now they're saying, hey, we're going to pull out our funding, and it's going to starve your country. So,
are you serious?
It's
so you over there in that house know what the crazy person is thinking. This is not a crazy person. You're crazy if you think that way.
Yeah.
Some nasty looking house off the road. They're hiding in these houses.
And if you go to Afghanistan, you probably won't find as many homeless, mentally ill people on the streets as you will in the United States. So the Taliban has a point with their law where, you know, the World Banks, you know, they say the Taliban is oppressive, and that the World Banks will free the populations because the Taliban will cut your hand off if you steal. But see, what they say is that if you haven't done anything wrong, you shouldn't have any reason to worry. So if you're not planning on stealing, then you shouldn't have any problem with getting your hand cut off. You know, and what one of the man had described it like as, you know, if you don't have these rules, then what happens is the children end up being kidnapped, which is a big problem in the United States. So they come down on the Taliban, they say they're oppressive against their women. You know, they said that the Taliban has taken pictures of the women down. They claim the Taliban won't let the women out on the streets alone, which we've already seen women reporters alone without a man reporting or questioning the Taliban. We've seen women that are not wearing this full cover thing, you know, because they claim that the Taliban won't just accept the hijab. You know, we're told about this stuff, but there's no proof. They just are spitting it. So you have to wonder though, like, so the world banks, let's say you don't want your wife to walk around with her butt hanging out. You know, the World Bank says that you're oppressive. You're oppressive because you don't want your wife to walk around with her butt hanging out. So I'm thinking that the women in Afghanistan are a little more proper than the women in the United States. And therefore, they probably don't have a problem with not walking around with their butt hanging out. So you squash that, as well as you can squash the idea that the Taliban is looking for dependency. You know, if they were looking for dependency, why would they take over the government, the so-called government? You see what I'm saying? This is another thing. This talk about the Afghan government. This is not Afghan people. They may have been born in Afghanistan, but they chose to work with the foreign forces. So they're really a foreign government. It's a lot about to do with the language that we're hearing. The way that they title, you know, these things. And so they don't want to accept now that the Taliban is in charge. And they're saying they're not legitimate, but there's steps they can take to achieve legitimacy is what they're being told. You know, this is a typical thing, you know. The man wants you to bend over, so he's gonna impose these kind of clearing houses, checkpoints that you can achieve to get to the man again. Now, they did all this 20 years fighting, and hundreds of Taliban soldiers had been killed on the battlefield each day during some of these, you know, high moments of fighting. So, I don't think the Taliban went and did all that just so that they could go and serve the foreign forces. You know, but again, they're trying to put. First, the man wants to play soft. He don't want to admit that he's surrendered. So he may pretend that he's God in the place still. He's going to leave at his leisure. We know that didn't happen. That man left a day before they were told to leave. The Taliban was kind enough to guard the place while the man got out. Now, the Taliban, we know, being told that they're brutal, was shown all these pictures of these people cutting each other's heads off on, you know, the television and stuff. So there's this kind of perception now that the Taliban is those people. The Taliban are the ones that do the beheading. Of course, they've connected or made an attempt to connect the Al-Qaeda with the Taliban. But the idea of this is false, because the Taliban has not admitted that they're connected to Al-Qaeda. Yeah, as the Western media sources suggest, you know, by saying that the Taliban has promised to not to cut ties with Al-Qaeda. So that implication is saying that the Taliban had ties to Al-Qaeda, and at the same time, they feed that impression. They say that we still have to have a presence to eliminate the threats. Of course, we know they're going to use their drones, and they've already began to bomb these people on the ground, claiming it's ISIS. Now they step back and they say, we're sorry, we killed innocent people. We spend the most amount of time as anybody to make sure innocent people don't get killed. It's good lip service. Instead of saying we spend the most amount of time or we take the most precautions to make sure innocent people don't get killed, just look at the numbers and say, well, how many innocent people did the Taliban drone bomb in the United States over the last 20 years? When you flip it and you think about if the Taliban was operating drones over the United States and killing ISIS members, ISIS cells, they say, they're killing ISIS cells with a drone over the United States. Would that be acceptable? Of course we know it's not acceptable, but I guess that goes into the kind of imperialism of this thing they call the United States. But make no mistake, these Western forces working for these Europeans will continue to try to eliminate the Taliban using this ISIS as their means, because they have the justification to be over there as long as there's a threat against the United States. I think one of the things people may realize is that although the Taliban was projected to be the threat this whole time, the Taliban is no longer being considered a threat, other than they may have connections to Al-Qaeda. Now, they've talked about how ISIS is a splinter branch of Al-Qaeda. However, the Taliban and ISIS are enemies. So if Taliban and ISIS are sworn or rivals, then why would the Taliban be connected to ISIS's mother? So mad confusion. Now, we also hear Al-Qaeda and ISIS are enemies too. It was kind of like the virus, where it changes, the outcomes change depending on the results. Now, the Taliban rules the moment they accept, this kind of moderation to appease the West, so that the West doesn't, just inflict war upon them, then they lose. We can assume that they realize this. We can assume that there's some among them that may not be one of them, if they've sold out. I mean, you can usually tell by the look of it. Just as if, how you can listen to someone and tell, kind of what they're about. Not just by the words they say, but by the voice. You can see that there's snakes. But these snakes are going to be portrayed not only as members, but as leaders. Yeah. We have to question, how much of this, the original leader, Omar, was real, and again, it could be a bin Laden fake, whereas there was a a secondary put in to take the image of. But the idea that this person wanted to live out in peace, that they were afraid that the West was coming, that's where the fib comes in. You know, any of these foreign actors that use their mouthpiece to deliver a message should be looked at questionably. We can think about it like this. These people don't care about us. They are destroying the earth. They are not telling us what's going on. What we're hearing is a lot of lies and a lot of filth. Information that's not important, because the idea is to disguise what is happening. The idea is to not talk about what's really going on. The idea is to leave people unprepared for what is to come. And you can see, you know, with this situation, you know, a bit about how it works. I mean, they promise you that somehow your life is going to get better if they go to Afghanistan. You know, that somehow their life will get better too. See? And they project these images to make you afraid of the terrorists. You see? When after it's all said and done, the USA is much more unsafe as a result of turning these people against them. You know, and the situation that happened at the airport where it was flooded with so many people that the foreign forces had to work with the Taliban to secure the premise. The Taliban had to protect them. They needed protection from the Taliban. So many people coming to the airport. Why? Because they were afraid. They were afraid because of what they had been told over the last 20 years about how, you know, vicious the Taliban was. And if they got a hold of them, they would cut their limbs off. So because of the fear that was fed to that population, people were crushed. People attempted to escape by hanging from the plane. You know, much chaos ensued. And if we were only told the truth, these things could have been avoided.
Morning. Yes, I would say you said that the people are not feeling safe because, you know, they were hyped about the threat of the Taliban. And when the airport was crashed, it was because people were in such fear because what they had been being told. Are you still there?
Yes, we can hear you.
No, but the thing is, what we see is that the Taliban had protected the airport. And we know that there was an agreement that was made, and it sounds like they were promised some equipment as a result, but then when they got the equipment, it was made unoperational. The military planes and other equipment. So that doesn't fare very well for the agreement. But, you know, as a pacifist, you know, program, purported to be pacifist programming, you know, why would people stand with the United States when the United States invaded Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And it has not resulted in making anyone safer in the United States or in Afghanistan that are innocent people. You know, it has resulted in making some people on the earth safer because they've implemented technology as a result of these so-called threats. And who would say that spending $3 trillion, would have been worth going after a bin Laden? When they claimed that bin Laden was behind the attack that killed 3,000 people. Well, how many people did die afterwards in all those wars as a result of this lie? So
what are you suggesting that Al Qaeda and bin Laden were not behind the 9/11 bombings, the 9/11 planes into skyscrapers?
I don't really know much about Al Qaeda. I think bin Laden was somebody who was considered to be anti-Western, and I think that we're given a secondary image of him since 9/11, not the real bin Laden. I think the original organization Al Qaeda was probably taken over just as the ISIS was taken over, which was originally the Islamic State of Iraq. It was Saddam Hussein loyalist. Once they eliminated that group, they used that name. Now that's become the new threat because it's just like the coronavirus. You couldn't keep telling people, oh, we got corona out here, and you're giving them vaccines, and you're telling them it's still spreading.
Well, before we get so far afield into the virus, tell me, Ahmed, are you personally an immigrant? Hello?
Well, yes. No, I was born in the United States. I've got to call this is another person because otherwise they won't take my call.
Okay, thanks for calling in.
Have a rounded discussion, but I would love to interview your guest. If somebody could please provide me with this information for him, I would like to sit down and ask him some questions.
Okay.